I'll now take my questions. Mr. Boyle, I have a sense that y'all are you're so big, you're in 50 states, right? So even though 6 states in the District of Columbia now have paid family leave, you couldn't say, well, New York already has a requirement, but we have to do it in Louisiana. You see where I'm going with that. But let's assume that all 50 states had paid family leave. Was it reasonable to assume that some states, some businesses would then change their benefit in order to integrate, if you will, with the federal program, decreasing their expenditure relative to that which would be received from the federal program?
Well, I can share with you the way we work with states today.
Now, we have to imagine that it's 50 states. Because now you may work with the state, but you still have to have a policy which works if somebody moves halfway between. You see where I'm going with that. So if California has a law and the person lives in Nevada and they're going to go from Nevada to California to care for a sick relative, do you have 2 different policies whether somebody lives in Nevada or California?
Well, Deloitte has a single policy that applies to all of our, as a national employer. And we work, we coordinate very closely with the states to execute their plans. And what Deloitte does is, we encourage our people to enroll in both programs, the state as well as the Deloitte program, and then Deloitte supplements over and above what a state may offer.
Do you pay the full amount that you normally would, or do you just top off okay, you would receive under our program $100. Through the state, you're getting 75. We'll give you the difference of 25.
Correct. Deloitte ensures that they get the full 100%, which
so you decrease your expenditure relative to what the state program is giving, but you make sure that the individual is held whole.
Correct.
Okay. So if you will, the federal program would supplant that which business is already doing, which would increase the cost to the federal taxpayer. I'm assuming that what you did would just be probably what other companies, because it's quite rational to do it that way, frankly. Now, Mr. Biggs, you're very interested in Social Security, and we know that we have a program that if you're above a certain income level, I think 75% of Americans already have paid leave of some sort. We may not call it paid family leave, but they get paid leave. And below a certain level, I think $30,000 is roughly the break point that typically people do not get it. I will say, frankly, my concern is if these folks who already are getting it now have business subtracting that which they pay and putting the financial burden on the taxpayer is a little bit worse off. But let me ask, I'm concerned about Social Security. And Social Security, if it eventually requires an increase in the payroll tax to make up for this looming deficit, I assume that there is a limit to the capacity to raise the payroll tax in order to help pay for our current obligations. There's a limit to how much we can raise that payroll tax without adversely affecting employment. Fair statement?
The more, with any tax, the more you raise it, it has a disproportionate effect on economic activities, the deadweight loss of the tax. So that would be one issue about using a payroll tax to fund parental leave when you're already using that same tax to fund Social Security or Medicare as well.
So, and particularly if we know that for those employees above 30,000, I think 75% of them already have paid leave, and I'll come to you, Ms. Szabo, because you're shaking your head, I'm open to this. But if we know that Deloitte is going to subtract their contribution, so money that would be paid by Deloitte is now being paid by the taxpayer, but we're taxing folks in order to pay this benefit. I'm very concerned about our ability to pay our current obligations and wonder again if we just are not supplanting with federal tax dollars for some folks, not for all, because some don't have the benefit. And we're very sensitive to the fact that some don't have the benefit. But if all we're doing is supplanting that which is being paid by Google already, I'm not sure that that's the best deal for the taxpayer. Now, Ms. Szabo, you're shaking your head no. Why are you shaking your head no?
2 reasons. So I'm first shaking my head because that statistic about paid leave that the higher income folks, that's vacation, it could be PTO, it's not the dedicated paid family and medical.
Now, is there a problem with somebody who has 6 weeks of vacation taking some of their vacation to care for a sick one, for a loved one?
That is no vacation. And
it may not be a vacation, but it is kind of the reality. My mother lived with me and died with Alzheimer's. I know this issue, let me just say. But I'm very sympathetic to what the small business owner said. which is that I got a small business, and I got thin margins, and I got 3 employees. If they take their paid vacation, and then they take their paid this and their paid that, and I'm paying it, and then they leave, I can't run a business. So I'm not being negative, I'm just trying to figure out that tension.
So vacation's also highly correlated with retention and morale and all of those other things. I think you would want your employee to have access to a shared benefit that's funded in a responsible, sustainable way, like the Family Act would be able to do their caregiving, take a vacation if they need to rejuvenate afterwards, and come back to work.
I think for the small businesswoman or the small businessman, because I was speaking to a small businesswoman just prior to the hearing, and she was speaking about the burden. So I think for the small folks, you know, the 5 people in the shop, there is a different dynamic than Deloitte, which has, I can't imagine how many people Deloitte has, more than Rhode Island, I suspect. Well, I am also out of time, and I will also have some questions for the record. Incredibly illuminating, but I think my final assessment is that it is those lower income people who don't have the benefit now, that we have limited capacity to raise payroll taxes if we're to make current obligation. And so therefore, anything we're going to possibly do with that, if we ever have to raise a payroll tax, should be dedicated to current obligations. There is limited capacity to raise it. And I'm also struck that for those bigger businesses offering it, we know empirically that they are subtracting that which they pay. They are not adding it to that which the government benefit would be. And I think we have to take that into account as we fashion this. Senator Brown, you got another question?
Yeah, no more questions. One request and one comment. If I could ask you to enter in the record letters of support for S337 from a number of
without objection
those groups. Thank you. And I think it's a question, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for raising the way you did at the end. And again, I thank the 3 panelists of what values we have as a society. When we passed within the last year a tax cut that we're 80% over the years, 80% of that tax cut will go to the wealthiest 1%, but we can't afford to do this. We can't afford to expand the Social Security system and pay for it in a responsible way. And I really do think it's what priorities do we set. Of course, there are limits, but it's what priorities we set. Especially, I mean, I feel good about what you've done, Ms. O'Boyle. I know that not everybody that works with you, obviously, works at your firm is moderate, is upper middle income or higher, but a higher percentage at a firm like yours than a lot of businesses, and you've provided for them very well. But a whole lot of people, when we talk about the dignity of work, a whole lot of Americans, where 40% of Americans don't have $400 if their car breaks down. And what do we do for that group of people? This Congress falls all over itself to give breaks to the large banks, falls all over itself to take away health care. A bunch of people dressed like me in suits that get good health care to take it away, yet we can't take care of the people that Ms. Szabo is arguing for. But those are my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing this hearing.
Thank you, and I'll just add to your remarks, I will say that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did result in multiple companies raising the amount of their generosity, if you will, for paid leave. And ultimately, a program has to be sustainable. It is false compassion if we put forward a plan which cannot be sustained. And unfortunately, that is many of our programs now. If you just look how the actuaries are telling us that Medicare will be bankrupt in 8 years and the Social Security Trust Fund by 2034, and indeed, if we're going to bail it out, we'd have to cut benefits by 17% now. So I think we have to we have to have a compassion which we understand can persist and not just be a feel-good for the moment. Thank you all for your consideration, your thought, and for your coming to testify. I adjourn.